My city mask is too small, makes my ears
Yeah.
stick out like a car doors.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this special call workshop this Thursday, January the 7th. This is the first of the calendar year, and I expect there'll be more down the road. I want to thank our new commissioner, Jenny Holland. Welcome. Glad to have you here.
Yep.
We are here to discuss in somewhat of a broad sense, economic development. Before I go there, let me welcome our guests who are downstairs listening and watching, and I think they will have an opportunity to hear what we have to say and discuss, and that should further a conversation amongst more. That would be our desire ultimately. Because we have to deal with the COVID restrictions, we've had to move those folks down into the training room at City Hall. So we're here to discuss in a broader sense economic development. We've had many discussions within City Hall about that. I'm going to turn this portion of the program over to our city manager, Mr. Earl Coffey, for his presentation.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. And it's a strange time. We've been trying to have this conversation for a bit. We acknowledge that COVID has not been our friend through the fall and winter, but we find ourselves here today to talk about economic development, really the beginning of, or the continuation. I thought about it earlier as the beginning, but it's really not. It's a continuation of what we've done as a community since the foundation, which is why I wrote this slide that is on the screen now. And we talk about the city, and folks often refer to the city as this organization or as this really entity. And really what the city is a coordination of community efforts, right? The city exists as a service arm or provider for the community. And the city was founded to provide services in some way originally. That's the purpose of the city's existence, right? Is to serve, as it relates to economic development then, is to serve the community. The city takes steps to actively support activity, which is related to a lot of times infrastructure growth and management, streets and roads, water and sewer, for example, and to also foster the environment so that economic activity can flourish. That's policies and administrative services such as planning and zoning. And so the city has this embedded role in economic development, right? And then I go back to a couple of these slides because I do think they're important to remember. And we have talked about during the Downtown Master Plan the importance of understanding synergy. We've talked about what that means is stronger connections, more and for economic development, it's more restaurants, it's enhancing what we do, it's better infrastructure, more shopping, for example, and then that turns into relationships. For example, on this slide, you saw that closer partnership with Ephraim McDowell, closer partnerships with Center, closer partnerships with our agencies that are within our community. I'm clicking the wrong thing. Sorry about that. Closer partnerships with Ephraim, closer partnerships with Center, et cetera. And you may remember that slide, but also on there is infrastructure things that the city helps with, parking, better sidewalks. Then we have some needs on there, the more multi-use trails, new parks, et cetera, right? So we start with that to talk about just why the city is here, right? The city has a role, but the city is a voice of the community, really is a consolidation of the community. We got to remember that.
Okay. I think the point needs to be made, or We need to be cognizant of the fact that the city is not just the downtown area, and a lot of people make that connection too in area, but we're talking about the community, as you said, and I think it's important to
Correct.
keep that in mind.
Right. And so growth, as time passes and as growth happens, the community grows into a stronger consolidated entity. And you move towards more full-time staff doing things and taking on initiatives such as Parks and Recreation, for example. And then the purpose of the discussion, again, is economic development. So we're going to now move away from that broad view of what the city is strictly down into economic development. And as we see now, the conversation we're having now is really a continuation of the natural development, the natural trend of a community, right? And the change in how communities approach to support economic development is ongoing. And what you're seeing as a community grows and we get more cohesion, you get an increase in public funds, the use of that towards economic development. And the net result for us today is that we exist in an environment where incentives are key, many options exist, and those are really an application of public funds in order to provide those most times, right? Which we've talked about land acquisition and land as being an economic incentive now. So what we've realized over the last few years is that we've gone to land being an incentive, and so now the question at hand is, how do you begin to approach that subject? What do you do? And internally for us, I talk about this for just a second, just for the backdrop. Our internal change has been going on for 20 years. The EDP was formed many years ago. SPG laws passed, which is a state government recognition that public investment is occurring. So the SPG law was designed to provide increased accountability for these organizations that the cities and counties were participating in, that it was tracking the expenditures of public funds and investing these public funds in these other entities. And the EDP adapted to that. And as we adapted to that as a community, then we reinvested in a strategic plan in 2017. And that's really leading us towards confirming this conversation about land as an incentive and the structure and those other things that we need to ultimately talk about, which is what we're here today to do. We're trying to figure out, when you talk about the purpose of this meeting, it's really, let's have dialogue on how do we go from where we're at today, understanding that what our recommendations are from the strategic plan, the recommendations are from the community conversations we've had. What do we do, right?
Could you explain SPG? Maybe some of us that don't
Special
know that.
purpose government entity.
Because we haven't given Jenny the secret code book yet.
Correct.
So,
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. That's true. SPG is the laws passed requiring special purpose government entities formed by local governments to be subject to open records laws and auditing, et cetera, right? So the state's reaction to that observance of the investment of public dollars into these other entities then is ultimately to increase regulation over those so that accountability can be had. The core tenet is that the city commission, you can't legislate away your fiduciary responsibility of the tax dollars. So you can't pass that off to some third party to manage for you. All right. So we did the strategic plan as a community. We had priority actions that were identified, such as discussion of organizational structure, which has happened, workforce development, which is ongoing, new business recruitment efforts. We see that effort is being made to revise that approach, existing business retention expansion, marketing and outreach, and then asset development. So those were the priority 6 categories that the strategic plan called for action items on, right? And I underlined asset development because when we're talking about the discussion of land, that's the category where it falls into, right? And we need to acknowledge that the community has touched all those things. We've all been on committees, we've all been in meetings where there has been strong effort to address the action items that were presented during the strategic plan. We would like to acknowledge that the community, as individuals that are doing work, there has been effort towards these categories by a lot of different individuals. Right? That is not a city effort, that is a community effort, and we want to reiterate that at all times. Right? So then, diving into these priority actions we talked about on the next couple slides. No, wait, this is the asset, I'm sorry. This is strictly the asset development. So out of the strategic plan, the objectives tied to the asset development were several. One was create locally controlled comprehensive property and asset database. Number two was work with property owners to establish pricing and understanding where those folks are. There's some sub-actions in there that we'll notice as we go through those. Create funding strategy was objective 3 for expanding available inventory for economic development. Continue to seek way to improve consistency and efficiency of regulatory approval processes. We've worked through planning and zoning on those types of things. A lot of what I know, when you get into those items and you read those individually, what you'll find is a lot of those action items folks have taken action on. So we go back to that slide. There's been active work and a lot of these action items that were identified in the strategic plan. And then we go on to, for example, determine market and financial feasibility of the following economic development assets: athletic complex, downtown boutique hotel, agricultural, tourism expansion and event center, exposition and event center, dining and convenience, small scale conference facility. So there's been actions. Downtown master plan has covered several of those, right? So those things are being talked about and being considered as a result of the strategic plan. So I don't want to avoid acknowledging that. And that is not just city, those are not just city actions, those are community actions. And then the develop a more comprehensive asset and financial toolbox to provide greater flexibility in business retention, expansion, and recruitment. And that, there again, that's an ongoing effort. Working with property owners along the bypass to consider business improvement districts. We're talking about organizing those concepts internally. Work with property owners in the downtown to consider business improvement districts. It's organizing a pool of loan funds I can't work with local banks, there it is, to form small business loan consortium targeting a 10% public investment threshold. So we've met with the downtown banks and we've done some of those things as a community, right? And so we're excited. I mean, a lot of stuff has been done tied to the strategic plan, but then we went beyond that. The biggest hurdle that we have is this land acquisition. So the land acquisition task force was created. I've jokingly referred to that 3-page document as the Turbofield Doctrine with Greg Cottle yesterday and laughing. And because that's what it is. Everyone refers to that document as and Mr. Atkins was on the committee. There were several community members that participated on that task force, and it is a very healthy 3-page document. Some of the findings of that was more land for industrial development was critical for our advancement. Plan for total investment tied to that land, not just the purchase price, which we identified properties that began at $1 million purchase price that ended up being a $5 million development expense. Then a finding of the task force was that funding ultimately will come from public agencies, which is the City Commission and the Fiscal Court. Then it tried to describe several funding options, such as TIF districts, et cetera. Then some things that were also identified, which I felt were important because they weren't asset development centric, but they were included in the task force report, which is we have to spend more time promoting and supporting existing industry, and they identified that as an essential task, which I think is interesting when you're looking at asset development. Community speaking with one voice when marketing is essential, and then also they identified the need for clear organizational structure that promotes the management and marketing of any land that is acquired and that is owned. So those three items are really drilled down into how do you do with the property if land is acquired, what happens to it? And they're acknowledging, and I think rightly so, is that ultimately if the city and county does acquire land, we ultimately still have to continue to speak with one voice, and we still have to have a clear organizational structure in how we implement economic development activities as a community. We can't lose sight of that. So then the task force had 4 main recommendations. Immediately begin the process of identifying and evaluating sites for future development. Then we have, the EDP has started this process. This says appoint a task force. We have started a process of trying to designate a group of community members to perform task A. B is assign the finance committee out of the EDP with an additional task of developing a funding plan for future land acquisition and development. Part of that problem with that item being the finance committee is ultimately if we're acknowledging that the city and county are the ones that have to buy the property, we have to then therefore also acknowledge whatever property that is acquired has to fit into their budgets and their plans. And so ultimately, the developing of a funding plan will have to be a negotiation between the city and county, ultimately, especially if funding is, of those public agencies, is the core, right? So I don't know what extent you can farm that out. I think that's got to occur during normal budget processes and normal allocations of money. Then the executive committee on the EDP was to take the lead in developing an appropriate organizational structure for management of partner-owned property. And that's one of the reasons why we've ended up here today is because there's a little bit of restriction that the city has. We go back to the original conversation. We talked about this before. There is only so far you can legislate away your obligation, your fiduciary obligation to manage the tax dollars, right? So therefore, state law has guided cities and local communities on how to form these quote authorities that will that do have the jurisdiction of land ownership, for example, for industrial development, and they're either called industrial development authorities or economic development authorities typically. And that's kind of why we're here today, is then therefore to talk about what direction do you all want to go, and staff needs some direction in planning, in budgeting, in developing documents, and that kind of thing. If the commission, if you all want to go down that road, which I think that there's strong evidence that you all do want to go down that road, and that we do need to have that conversation. So I want to focus on the recommendations from the task force, those being, after about a year of effort, are the 4 main items that have been, that need addressed. And so what we're trying to do is figure out how to address those, right? And that's really all in terms of presentation, that's really all I have. It's a discussion, and I do have one more slide that the mayor put together and wanted us to talk about as a proposal for an EDA, which is an organizational chart, and I'll show that now. I'll speak into the mic. I'll show that now, just because as we were talking about it, I mean, you know, that's what we need to do, is try to figure out if we do an EDA, what that would look like.
And what you see behind you is simply the first attempt at composing people that meet the
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if I really want to add anything. I think the document speaks for itself. I think it's very obvious that as we visited other communities, what they offered in the form of economic development, whether it be a partnership or an authority, did not sound very similar to what we have here in Danville. But I think my task right now is that I'm trying to be as open-minded as I can and seeking out all the information. I want to thank Mr. Coffey for that presentation. But as we seek out information, take our direction, take our leadership from that information and try to develop what we feel is best for our county. One of the things that I would like to see the commission strive to do is that we have an economic development partnership, and I'm sure it has some strengths, it has some growths, and it has some areas of needed improvement. And so as we move through this process, I want us to be sure we identify what those are so that if and when a time comes to make a decision about continuing or moving to something else, that we've at least looked very closely at what we currently have. I want to remind the commission that we paid the money for the planning that took place that got us to this point with this partnership, and that we don't lose sight of what we learned from that study as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, and there's.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may interrupt, I've received notice that those in the basement cannot hear when you're speaking. They heard Mr. Atkins clearly, and I think so. I'd ask that in respect for those that are listening that way, when you do speak, if you'd pull your mask down slightly so those can be heard.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, and so this is a process, right? So we're starting a process of trying to resolve what we do. Mr. Atkins, to your point, is we've got the recommendations to acquire land. Legally, there's really one strong way for the city to actually and county to actually do that, which is through the KRS allowed options, which is some type of an authority. So if you form an authority, what then do you do? How do you administer that authority? How does it integrate into other things you're doing? Do you need to revisit other things you're doing to try to revise those relations? I don't know those questions, but I think we have to start with verifying the idea that the commission desires to. We need to confirm that the commission desires to use land as an economic incentive, right? If you do that, then legally you're going to have to deal with an EDA. Do you want a partner or do you want to go alone? So if you want a partner, then one of the steps we'll need to do soon, and fiscal court is watching and observing. So we need to engage the fiscal court officially. We need to go speak with them at their next regular meeting, if that's what you all want us to do, and investigate to some extent. Do they want to participate in the conversation? And we can ask them what format, how do they want to participate? Do we invite the county judge and do we appoint a commissioner? How do you go about that discussion about funding for that land acquisition amongst those two parties? And then once these two public agencies have agreed on how you buy land, how you pay for it, or when you purchase land, do you get options? There's so many things you can talk about there as a group. Then once you've done that, then how do you engage? How does that integrate into your economic development concepts? And I think that becomes, a broader discussion, right? So there's just this is the beginning, and you can't jump to the end. I think that's the key.
So your first step, you're advocating a first step of, what does the commission want to do? And
We need
what
official
are
direction
our
on that.
options?
Yes.
What are the options? You want to lay out what you see as the options?
If you desire to purchase land and use it as an economic development incentive, then you need to form an authority that has the, especially if you're appointing that with the county, you need to form an authority that has political jurisdiction over that land, right?
So we can't just go halfers with the county and buy land without having a
No,
authority.
You can.
Without having a formal EDA structure is what you're saying?
The only statutorily authorized manner in which to purchase land jointly with another governmental agency is through an authority. And I would not recommend any other manner in doing so. So, but I think to play off of the city manager's, or just to distill it a little bit smaller than even the city manager suggested, I don't think you even need to decide if you want to purchase land or not. Your action today would be simply to whether you want to have it as an option in the future. We have to have a structure in place should you decide to utilize this incentive at some future date. So what you are looking at today is somewhat of a strategic plan to have an option to purchase land jointly in the future. So your decision isn't whether you're going to utilize that option, it's just if you want to have the option available.
Thank you.
And would it also be safe to say that if we decide to have an EDA, how does that affect our relationship with the current EDP that we belong to?
It doesn't have to, but that's something that you would decide at a later date once this is created. And, you know, we can theorize potentially about those types of questions and many, many others. However, I think it may be somewhat unproductive to go that far down the line today because there are many options going forward, and I think you would have to just address those at the appropriate time. And I think through the city manager's presentation, you're saying that the value is in partnershiping and how you partnership with those involved in the community is critical. Not only in economic development and in everything. So today, if you're saying you want to have this option available, there's a statutorily approved manner in which to have it, and you can create it based upon the structure that was proposed or some variation thereof, and then empower staff to take it to the fiscal court to take their temperature on the matter, and the result would be an interlocal agreement between the local governmental agencies that would outline the terms specified, and then you would have something in place to acquire land, which you could do and in many different ways. But what's clear is that whatever the authority is that's created would actually buy the land and then manage it for its development or expansion of whatever industrial or commercial purpose may exist.
Well, it would seem to me, I mean, if we're just deciding on whether or not we should even head down this path, to me, based on the reports that the task force did and just my own personal research into the matter is, you know, if we're going to stay in the game, this is something we have to do, because that's what's being done by our competition, and to stay relevant, we need to do at least that. So, and I think the partnership you described, I think that would be preferable personally. So that's kind of where I am, just to sort of get the ball rolling. If anybody wants to jump in,
I want to ask Mr. Atkins, in your travels on this, what did you find in other communities? How are they addressing this same situation?
Well, if I remember correctly, this has been over 2 years. This report was December of 2019.
you
So we
remember
mean
that like yesterday.
we did a lot of work in the course of the year of 2019. I would say that the communities that we visited, if they had an EDA, everybody belonged to the EDA. There were very few communities that had two. If they had an EDP partnership, then it was an EDP partnership. But my recollection is that most of them had EDAs, and the city and county, along with city and county were the major movers and shakers, but they also were connected to lots of partnerships around the city and the county. It was a joint effort. What I really want to say, though, is that those places spoke with one voice. those places appeared to have an established degree of trust among all partners and all those folks who were involved in the economic decisions in their city and, well, let's say in their county, because they were really city and county. And that's something that we've struggled with, is how do you create in Danville and Boyle County one unified voice, and my old caveat, that's not creating negative PR for itself.
That's a good point. I think this is actually an opportunity to do that, starting with something new and going at it cooperatively and with hopefully one voice. I think this would be a good chance for that. And you're right, that needs to be
But even with
paramount.
that being said, I started out by saying I want us to take time to look at the EDP partnership that we currently have and refresh our memories, re-educate ourselves about what its goals and objectives and its purpose is, and then look at what strengths it has brought or it's bringing to the community currently, and then look at the growth areas, and then see how we can work to improve those. When I say growth areas, I'm just going to say it out there. Those areas in need of improvement, in case there's someone wondering what I mean when I say say growth areas. And then if we come to the point where we realize that there are certain parts of the partnership that we currently involved in that cannot satisfy what we as a commission, what we as a city identify as our need, and we move into some other type of organization.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean,
It
there's
isn't,
no need tearing it all down if we don't have to. Just
Yes.
find out what works best
Yeah.
and
but if I heard him correctly, we're at that point as far as being competitive in the area of available land.
Yeah.
Is that a fair summation?
Yeah. And also, I guess I would have put this out there too. I look at economic development. I'm not just looking at industrial land. I'm looking at commercial things all around our city and our county that are sitting vacant, that are currently available, that I think that needs to be part of what our focus needs to be. I'm not saying that's one of the strengths or one of the weaknesses of what we're doing currently, but I think that has to be a focus of what we're taking a look at.
Yeah, I thank you for making that distinction.
And if I may too, to one other point that's kind of been made, is that I think really probably within the last 4 or 5 years, we've probably seen more unparalleled collaboration with your counterparts at the fiscal court than in maybe any other recent history between the two parties. When the city manager started out his discussion of community, that is Danville Boyle County
Yes,
as in
right.
solidarity.
That's right.
And I think it has been more of a community recognition that the two governing bodies have various strengths. And in order to play with those strengths and accentuate the positives and speak unified, it takes both parties and other partners recognizing those strengths. We have reorganized not only 911, but we've done Parks and Recreation. The city's acknowledged wholeheartedly that solid waste is one of the county's strengths, not alone, but tax collection, and that the city should partner with the county when their strengths can be accentuated. And likewise, the county has done the same. Mm-hmm. They have said the city is strong in certain areas and we will partner with them. And so what I think you're seeing is some of that synergy that the city manager related to, and economic development should be no different. And an action today or in the future on this very matter is in line with those major areas that were just discussed, 911, Parks and Recreation, solid waste, and tax collection, amongst others.
I have a quick question. Just, it kind of struck me, has anything been done to address this task force in the past year, like 2020? Or is this the first time we're looking at taking action on these recommendations from, 13 months ago?
The EDP has had a lot of activity tied to all the recommendations, and there's subcommittees on the EDP, and there's been a lot of activity. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about funding, part of it too, truthfully, is, I hate to say this just because 2020 was gone, but, you know, it is COVID related. Like, we've had delays in actions that we've had. You know, City Hall was closed through Christmas to the public. You know, there's been delays, but there's been ongoing activity tied to all, in my mind, many of the items in the strategic plan in 2017 by people in the community. Now, the folks that felt like they could address it a lot of times would pick it up. Sometimes that was the city, sometimes that was the EDP staff, right?
But also, to answer her question, there's a perception in our community, and I can say it, a perception among the city commission that of these 4 recommendations, enough has not been done in trying to bring these things into real action.
Yeah, we've been trying to have the conversation tied to dealing with the land issue for 4 or 5 months now, or 6, truthfully. And we're here and we want to have that conversation. You know, we don't disagree. When we look at economic development at 20,000-foot view, we can identify things that we should be doing, that we need to be doing, that we need to focus our energy towards. Business contacts, business retention beyond the industrial market is only a portion of our local economy, right? The medical end, what are we doing? You know, we're partnering with the hospital, but how can we improve that relationship? And how can we engage the hospital one-on-one, for example? And how do we engage Center College? And we're trying to include them in discussions with our downtown master plan more elaborately. And those elements of economic development we're trying to modernize, and the community, it's not the city trying to modernize that. It's a reflection of the community acknowledging that we need to modernize that. So when we had our downtown master plan meeting, you had total participation with anybody that we called to participate in those meetings. And so the community is well aware that we need to modernize and change, and we need to make those business contacts like we've talked about, and know what the businesses in our community's needs are, and not just industrial businesses, right, like we talked about. So it's an interesting conversation. It's leading us to land. That is the administration of your economic development strategy is one thing. The acquisition of land is a conversation for us here today, and how we then integrate that into your strategy can be 2 different things. The city needs to develop a more robust incentive plan. So there's just all kinds of conversations there that we need to have and we need to continue to have. But the important thing is to acknowledge that they've been ongoing for many years, and they are different now than they were 20 years ago, and they'll be different in the future, I'm sure. But we need to continue to adapt and continue to move and not be stagnant.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that point, because I don't think this is any condemnation of the current EDP structure. It's just time has, you know, things have changed, and so in order to keep up, we have to change as well. So if we decide today that, yes, this is something we want to pursue, what's step 2?
Well, what I'd like to do personally is go talk to the county before we invest a lot of staff time in developing anything. So we need to go to the fiscal court meeting. If they meet next week, we need to reach out to the county judge, and we know he's listening. We need to go to the meeting and just have a quick conversation and to confirm with those folks that the formation of a public agency to buy and acquire or manage or whatever you want to describe land and to promote economic activity with land, is that something they want to do as a partner? And if it is, then that steers staff as far as documents we can create, and we can come back to you then after that and react to their conversation after that. But I think the next best step is to go talk to the fiscal court directly. It doesn't have to be the full commission. We can have that conversation just at their regular business meeting next month or next week, if that's what, I think that's appropriate, just to start.
And by the virtue of, I didn't do a head count, but I think there's a majority of the fiscal court is watching here today in the training room. So to that end, and there being listening participants in the program, I think a communication with maybe just the city manager at the next fiscal court meeting, if they would entertain that invitation, would be appropriate to get the necessary feedback. upon a positive affirmance, I'll say, from the fiscal court to partner with the city in the creation of an authority, our next technical step would be to create an interlocal agreement, and which I would do in concert with the county attorney, if acceptable. And upon us finalizing that document, it would be open for approval by both of the public agencies, as well as ordinances to create the authority. Now, I will say in my review of multiple other jurisdictions that have similar agreements, that is not a complicated document to create. It's essentially a regurgitation of the statutory provisions that allow for these types of organizations, and I would say we could do that quickly. So if the court were to give positive affirmance, I think the county attorney and I could have an interlocal agreement ready for presentation at the following business meeting of both chambers that would be ready for approval. So I'm saying that this could realistically happen by the first meetings in February of both governmental agencies, and that would not be a stretch or unreasonable goal if you decided to proceed.
And when we talk about administratively, things that we need to be doing for infrastructure and other things, administratively organizing your mechanism by which you process land, that's a big step. That's going to take some time. You know, we're talking about, so you don't want to be sitting here trying to make this decision after you have someone interested in coming to your community, right? So we need to be agile enough to at least move in the direction, even if we don't have land acquired or land in a bullseye, right?
This being a workshop, we can't take a vote.
No, you can't take a vote. However, you can, Commissioner Cottle's given a public statement of support, and if others are willing to do that, then the city manager can take the affirmance of your positions as a directive without a formal vote.
I'm very supportive. I've spoke with Earl before. I spent a lot of time working in various cities across Kentucky and saw just the magic happen elsewhere where growth and development happened, whether it be Somerset, Bowling Green. The key locally, and it was like over maybe a 20-year period, was the city and county working together with teamwork. That's kind of really, made one voice happen. So I'm very supportive of the Economic Authority.
Point this out too. Eventually, you'll talk about a scope, and you described Somerset and Bowling Green as two opposite ends of how they treat EDAs. One has a single EDA to cover every possible thing, and including the organization of everything. And in Bowling Green, you have many different EDAs and organizations that do things. So it's like the opposite end of those spectrum, right? And so we can talk about that as time passes if things are affirmed.
Commissioner Atkins, you have a feeling?
I'm not going to stand in the way of having staff talk to the county, nor am I going to stand in the way of having something put together so we can review it. I'm just not going to be in a position to vote for or against the document without getting some other relevant data about this process and about whatever.
This won't be I don't think this will be the last
No.
workshop on this.
And let me clarify, staff is not soliciting a vote or
Right.
asking you to give your approval in stone. This is just
That's right.
some positive affirmance to proceed to create a document that will eventually go to a vote, hopefully by 2 public agencies. Or more if Junction City and Perryville hopefully would like to participate, and that would be the goal.
Yeah. Oh, I understand that, yeah.
I will agree with Commissioner Cottle on his thoughts, and
How many times you said that?
Yeah, that's a first.
said
Is
that.
that a first?
Wow.
many times.
It's a new
and you
year,
know
it's a new
it.
day.
And you know it,
I'm just kidding.
and you know
Hey,
it.
Kevin, a new year, a new day.
Yes, sir.
Well, and Commissioner Terry's not with us, but, we know how she feels about this. She's spoken she's spoken publicly about it several times. Again, I just think we're all in the investigative part of, we're trying to investigate and find out as much as we can about all the different options. And
Right.
so I'm okay with that.
Agree.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll approach the county and try to be at their next meeting, and we'll go from there.
And Earl, I don't know if it'd be, I'm sorry, Mr. Coffey, our city manager, I don't know if it'd be appropriate, but somewhere in this process, I would be excited about the commission, the city manager, and even the city attorney to do a little road trip.
We need to do more of that. One of the things that, and I say that folks critique folks, public agencies for traveling and doing those things, but to be honest with you, it's essential. You have to understand, you know, you're looking at a community, your development as a community. You have to go see what other people have done. You have to go investigate that, boots on the ground. You really do. And so we do need to do more of that as a community.
Yeah.
Right.
Ju-
And I
just-
think, and Mr. Atkins, you asked for in the fall, you were talking about, and I want to, I say this to let you know that it's not lost on us. You talked about flow charts and proposed flow charts and that kind of thing. I think that is premature. And you know, we could have done something like that. I just think that's not the right time. I think you got to make some decisions on what you're doing in terms of tasks, which is ownership of land is a task,
Yeah.
say. And then as you go through it, then you're going to naturally flow into whatever flow chart or whatever organization that needs to be amended, or how it adjusts. The EDA would be formed. How does that function in our community, within our economic development approach?
Yeah.
So item one, though, has been accomplished today, and that is to let you approach fiscal court at their meeting on Tuesday to gauge their interest. And if their interest is like ours, then we go to item two, which is to work on an interlocal agreement between the city attorney and the county attorney, and that will bind us together in an effort. And then the other things you mentioned will fall after that.
Yeah, and I know Ashley's Barker taking real good, copious notes, I know, but don't want to lose the thing about looking at EDP as it currently exists and salvaging some pieces out of that, or let that be a part of my focus as I look at trying to make this decision. And getting back to the fact about the road trip, regardless of what the report says, my excitement was to be in a community. Now, I know sometimes you just get the good side, but being in a community where we met government people as well as non-government people, non-elected people, and they were trying to talk about their community, not necessarily trying to sell me anything, but just trying to tell me about the success of their community. And I think I'm young enough to be able to get past the fluff and get to the real stuff. And I really felt real good about the communities that we visited and what they were doing and about the progress that they had made.
So the folks downstairs may have some questions which they can't ask here at the workshop, so who should they direct those to?
If they'll get them to us, we can, any questions we receive, we will pass on Monday night and at the commission meeting and during the city manager report, or we'll, if necessary, we'll have a special item. And that anybody's welcome to come in and talk, and we'll try to figure out and assess what their questions are and try to figure out how that needs to be addressed.
Okay, thank you.
Are you willing to listen to someone that wants to come up right now and talk to us?
I would be willing, certainly. I didn't know if we could.
If there is, I don't know if there is. I'm just saying if that's appropriate.
If our city attorneys wants to
We
make,
typically don't have outside conversation in our workshops. Again, I mean, I don't chair the meeting, Mayor, so if you want to solicit that, it's not. I would just say, as a matter of efficiency, it would be nice for the city manager to be able to funnel any questions or concerns that may be raised so that we can deal with them, and he can have that in effect deal with the fiscal court as a body at its next meeting on Tuesday to address or answer those concerns ahead of time. That being said, if you feel like you need to have some more discussion today, then by all means, it's your meeting. I'll just say that the point of the meeting was to see if the city had any type of stomach to accomplish a goal from the task force. And I think you've all made statements to that end. Staff has the direction needed and sought today, and now has a path forward. However, I'm not going to tell you you can't hear people if you do in fact want to hear some comment.
Mr. Atkins, you want that?
Well, you know me, I'm always open to listen to the public. I just think we invited fiscal court. I think there was somebody from the Industrial Foundation. There might have been somebody from the chamber. You know, we can't hear from all of them, but, so maybe I'll just back up and say, if you desire to have comments to us or ask questions, use the city manager as your conduit, and we will take the advice of the city.
That's right. And I think it
Attorney.
would be most appropriate to
Yeah.
have public comment all at one time
Yeah.
at a public meeting
Yeah.
when the interlocal agreement is therefore before you. Before then, I think, frankly, it's premature.
Yeah, there's just so many questions that could be asked that no one's going to have an answer to.
Yeah.
You okay with that?
Sure.
Yeah.
I will agree with Commissioner Carvel again. We had one agenda item. I think we've accomplished that.
Is Commissioner Terry,
Her grandmother.
I know, but she was going to be trying to chime in and listen to us.
Yeah, I don't know if she's.
We didn't hear
online.
anything from her?
I believe she has been watching.
Okay, she hadn't said anything?
Commissioner Terry, we wish you the
Yeah.
best. Your
Yes.
grandmother too.
Hope your grandmother's doing good.
Yeah.
Well, in her defense on that, while she's fully able to view the proceedings, open meetings laws prohibit her participation. So I'm sure she would anxiously participate if allowed to. But we had that discussion yesterday that obviously gave her authority to watch like anyone, but she could not participate.
Oh, so you set her straight.
Maybe.
A mute button, just like on the.
I believe that ends our productive part and business part of our meeting. To hear a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Motion made. Do I hear a second? Thank you, Jen. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. We are adjourned.